At a time of massive and unprecedented income and wealth inequality, the Republicans look around them and they say, wow, we got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Very richest people are becoming phenomenally richer. Working people are struggling. What's the solution? Well, obviously, the solution is to give massive tax breaks to the rich and make a very bad situation even worse.
So Bernie Sanders rolls into this hearing doing the same routine he's been doing since disco was on the radio. Finger wagging, yelling about the rich, and acting like the only solution to every problem in America is to take more money from someone else. Same speech, same script, same socialist greatest hits album. But this time he ran straight into Senator Bernie Moreno, and let's just say the lecture tour got interrupted by a reality check. Moreno didn't bring slogans, he brought numbers, experience, and a Rolls-Royce example that absolutely nuked the narrative. If you enjoy watching socialist talking points run headfirst into common sense, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Let's watch the full clip before I give you the full breakdown.
It is apparently not good enough that the top 1% today own more wealth than the bottom 90%. That is rather phenomenal. But in my Republican colleagues' eyes, the wealthy and the powerful need even more help. 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%, just not good enough. We could do better than that. So not only should the very wealthy be asked to pay their fair share of taxes, the Republicans believe that we should give huge tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires.
I think we need to kind of go back in time for just a little bit, not quite as much as in Back to the Future. Let's just go back to 2020. There was an election in 2020. The Democrats gained control of the Senate and the White House. And what's been the result? During the 4 years of President Trump, his first term, it was never better for working class Americans. Real wage growth grew. The middle class was doing better. Our economy was doing fantastic. The Republicans had passed the TCJA, which gave tax relief to all Americans. And we received, and this is very important, the federal government received a record amount of revenue. So even though there was tax cuts for the wealthy was the headline. By the way, that line is as old as dirt, and it's totally false. While the tax rates were cut, tax revenue was at a record level. It would be fascinating if there was just one Democrat that acknowledged that we received a record amount of revenue in the federal coffers. Do you think to yourself, well, wait a second. Like, I'm a business guy. Like, if my revenue was at an all-time high and I was losing money, I'd say we have a huge expense problem. Like, oh my God, how could I get record revenue and yet have record deficits? Why? Because when you give Democrats control of our budget, what happens? I'll give you some examples. When my colleagues talk about how they defend the working class, I think the working class spoke pretty clearly on November 5th of 2024 and said, thank you, but no thank you. So what can happen in my old world of owning car dealerships? Mr. Chairman, you could walk into one of my dealerships, be a multimillionaire, pick out a beautiful custom-made Rolls-Royce Spectre where the audio system upgrade is $21,000. The logoed headrest in the back seat are $1,500. The umbrella with a logo could be 10 grand. You can lease that car. And thanks to the amazing and remarkable policies from the Democrat Party, the federal government will give you a check for $7,500. Think about that for just a second. That is a bill that became law called the Inflation Reduction Act, giving Rolls-Royce lease customers $7,500 lowers inflation, and every one of them voted for that bill. How did that bill become law, you ask? Did it get 60 votes? Rigorous debate? No. They did it through reconciliation. And Kamala Harris broke the tie-breaking vote so that multimillionaires could have their fifth vehicle parked in Palm Beach with a check for $7,500 thanks to the U.S. taxpayer.
All right, now that you've seen the clip, let's talk about what just happened. Because that wasn't just a disagreement, that was a demolition job. Bernie Sanders does what Bernie Sanders always does. He starts with the same dramatic speech about the top 1%, wealth inequality, and how Republicans supposedly only care about billionaires. It's the same script he's been reading for 40 years like it's carved into stone tablets. But the problem is, slogans don't survive contact with facts, and Moreno came armed with exactly that. Moreno calmly takes everyone back to something Democrats desperately try to pretend never happened, the Trump economy. During those years, working Americans weren't drowning in lectures about inequality. They were actually making money. Real wages went up. Jobs were booming. The middle class was finally breathing again. And the big villain Democrats love to scream about, the tax cuts, didn't bankrupt the government the way they claimed. In fact, federal revenue hit record levels. Record levels. Think about how embarrassing that is for the tax-the-rich crowd. They spent years saying tax cuts would destroy government revenue. Then the exact opposite happened. The money came in, the economy exploded, and suddenly the real problem became obvious. It wasn't revenue. It was spending. When Moreno said, "If I had record revenue in my business but still lost money, I'd know I had an expense problem," that wasn't just a good line. That was a mic drop moment. Every business owner in America heard that and nodded immediately. But the moment that really fried the narrative was the Rolls-Royce example. Because nothing exposes political hypocrisy faster than a real-world example people can actually picture. Moreno explained that under the Democrats' so-called Inflation Reduction Act, a millionaire can walk into a dealership, lease a Rolls-Royce Spectre loaded with luxury upgrades, $21,000 sound system, $1,500 embroidered headrests, even a ridiculous $10,000 umbrella, and the federal government hands that guy a $7,500 tax credit. Paid for by the American taxpayer. Let that sink in. The party that lectures everyone about the working class literally passed a bill that subsidized luxury electric cars for rich people. You can't make this stuff up. Bernie Sanders is up there yelling about inequality while his own party is writing checks for millionaire EV leases. If hypocrisy burned calories, Washington would finally solve the obesity crisis. And Moreno didn't even have to yell. He just explained it like a businessman explaining a bad deal. That's what made it so devastating. Sanders was pushing ideology. Moreno was talking reality. This is exactly why so many working-class voters walked away from Democrats in 2024. People are tired of speeches about fairness from politicians who create policies that make zero practical sense. They want growth, opportunity, and leaders who understand how the real economy works, not people who think government can engineer prosperity with subsidies and slogans. Moreno didn't just win that exchange. He exposed the entire contradiction of the modern Democrat message in about 2 minutes flat. And judging by Sanders' reaction, that's a math lesson he definitely wasn't planning to attend.